All right, on today's episode, going to talk to you about why Patty Mills is not broken, and we can probably stop with some of the narrative around a certain mid-season event is the cause of his demise. Also going to take a look at where the Nets are as they in the standings as they enter the final two games of the season. All that and more, but after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Got to thank you for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, YouTube as well. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe button over there. Every episode going up as a video over on YouTube, climbing toward 2,000 subscribers over on YouTube. So make sure you're part of that movement. Really appreciate all of the just goodwill, good cheer, comments, even some questions that have happened over on YouTube. So make sure you check that out. I'm Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR.com. Got you set up with projections really for every single sport. NBA as we chuck along to the end of the season. MLB, opening day in the books. It's all over there on DFSR, so go check that out. As you said in the open, wanted to talk today as we get toward the last couple games of the season, a theme among some fans and even some actual, Nets folks out there, content providers that have talked a lot about Patty Mills and what's happened to him over the second, not half of the season, but over this, final third of the season, and which at times has been tough. Been a tough watch. Been some high-profile misses. It's funny because Nets fans know this kind of thing pretty well, having spent multiple years saying that Joe Harris can't. We have not done this, but saying multiple years that Joe Harris struggled in key moments. A narrative that can be built among fans just because that's what fans tend to do. Fans tend to look at sort of micro moments, look at really small sample sizes, feel like that is what is the actual, truth around a player or a situation, and then sort of cement it in their minds so that when it happens again, it fills some kind of narrative that they've already built around a player performance, whether that player is clutch, whether that player is not clutch, whether they can hit big shots, whether they can't, whether there's something broken about them in the moment because they've had some misses. This is just a time-honored tradition in sports. We've seen it year after year after year after year with player after player after player in basically every fan base. It's not a new thing. It's kind of why sports fans are sports fans, because it's kind of fun at times, or painful, however you want to look at it, to create stories in your mind. You want to create stories. You want to have those stories be true because you want to think that you understand the sport better than other people, whether it's your peers, whether it's people that talk about it online, whether it's people with podcasts, whoever it is. This is sort of what happens in sports, and this is definitely what has happened with Patty Mills over the last few weeks, let's call it months of this season, because he's struggled. He's definitely struggled from three. At times, he's had some high-profile games that, shots haven't gone down, and it's looked, you can say that it's looked kind of bad at times, whether it was that he's hit the wall in terms of playing too many minutes, whether it's because, he had to take on such a big offensive load to start the season for a guy who was brought in to basically just be a sixth man, and a really, really nice addition for the Nets. But then, and it starts off as good as you can imagine, and then maybe you want to say, okay, well, it's tailed off here over the second half of the season. And what we've heard from people, from a lot of different people this year, is that when you want to attribute why someone might, in your mind, be having some struggles, you want to anchor it in some kind of reason behind it, something that makes sense, something that can, pull out from all the little minutia that happens in sports and kind of like work your brain into a way that it, starts to come together. And people have done that around the three-point contest. Obviously, Patty Mills participated in the three-point contest during All-Star break, did not win, was out in first round. And then as the months have gone on since that happened and the shooting has regressed a little bit, we'll talk about that in a second, it was easy for fans to kind of tell a story in their mind that it was the part of the reason for that, or the whole reason for some of the decline, was because he participated in the three-point contest. And maybe you heard that other people that have participated in have seen their shot drop off. I don't think there's any real statistical evidence for that outside of just some fun little talk show host narrative things. It doesn't seem like a lot of the other players that have been in this, that have been in the three-point contest are struggling all that much. But with Patty Mills, it ended up becoming a nice little story, or, makes it so it can wrap your head around it. But I'm here to tell you that it's not a problem. He's not broken, folks. Okay. Patty Mills is not broken. What we've probably seen from him over the last, month or so with the shooting has been just regression to the mean. Regression comes for us all, if the sample sizes are large enough. And that's really what's happened to Patty Mills. And it's not, we can't, so I'm going to go through some numbers here that are going to paint a picture of why Patty Mills, one, there's really nothing wrong with him, I don't think. Why, two, some of the narrative piece is overblown. And three, why it seems like in our minds that it's been a lot worse than it actually has been. Okay, so let's go first to let's walk it all the way back to the beginning of the year. Part of what happens with Patty Mills is that his start in Brooklyn was so amazing that it probably actually clouded Nets fans, the reality for Nets folks, for the rest of the season, right? He starts off the season, he goes 10 for 10 from three over the first two games. So right away out of the box, he's shooting 100% from three. In your mind, you probably starts to formulate this idea of Patty Mills simply can't miss a three-pointer. Okay, over November, or early in October and November, he basically shoots 50% from three during that stretch. An unheard of number, right? Like, this is well far and beyond what we can expect from a player over the course of a whole season. Players are just not going to shoot 50% from three, especially at the volume that he's shooting at, which was way more than 7 attempts per game. That's just not going to. It's really what you should be telling yourself the story of is not that Patty Mills has become some sort of elite shooter. It's that actually this probably will not last. Like, this is one of the all-time hot streaks that he's on. But because I think that happens, we ground ourselves in this thing where Patty Mills is going to hit clutch shots. He's going to make every three. He's all the things maybe Joe Harris wasn't, if you want to just juxtapose some of his story onto another Nets player. And that's where we kind of start out with Patty Mills. And so when there's struggles later, it's going to look like something's broken, but it's only going to look like something's broken probably comparatively to how good it started, because it was, what's the opposite of broken? It was like supersized. It was just like super enhanced to start the season. It wasn't going to sustain. He's not going to shoot 50% from three at this many attempts per game over the course of a season. So Nets fans start to tell themselves a story about how great he is maybe in their minds, and then when there's struggles later, it looks even worse by comparison. So then you fast forward to Patty Mills going into the All-Star break, and he takes part in the three-point contest. Okay, great. All nice little story. Doesn't do that well. No big deal. Okay, we get out of the All-Star break. Now here's where the story, people start doing some revisionist history around what actually happens. Because if you want to say to yourself, oh, well, the three-point contest broke him, right? Him shooting, 15, however many they shoot, him shooting 25 three-pointers in the three-point contest somehow broke this guy that's been playing thousands of minutes over a, many season career, is, if you just say it to yourself like that, say to yourself, would just shooting some balls on national television on TNT on a random Saturday night break a guy like Patty Mills, who's been in the league since 2009 and has been one of the better three-point shooters during that time? Like, when you say it to yourself out loud like that, it sounds ridiculous. I hope it does, at least. If it doesn't sound ridiculous to you, then maybe this isn't the podcast for you. But if you just start with that and say, oh, did him shooting these 25 balls just all of a sudden mess him up? No. The answer is no. And then statistically, we can just say it's no also. Because again, this revisionist history only happens months later, or maybe month plus later. Okay? It doesn't happen right away. It's not like he just came out of the box following the All-Star break and all of a sudden couldn't shoot again. Far from it. That happens right around the 19th of February. He comes out and shoots 0 for 8, but then if you look over the course of actually the next month, So this is where the story gets added onto. He does shoot one for 14 in his first 3 games back from the All-Star break. So if you wanted to tell yourself a story that it broke him, then this is also enhances it. It makes it look like it's actually something you want to be true. But now, let's look at the first month of him after the All-Star break. Shoots 37%. 37% over a 12-game stretch. Where would you say to yourself over that stretch that he's messed up? Well, no, of course not. Like it can't be true. Both things can't be true. You can't be broken and then shoot 36% from 3 over the course of March. Those two things don't line up. They don't compute. And I would hope that when you hear this kind of stuff, you say to yourself, oh, right, maybe I was sold a false bill of goods that this one sort of micro event over the course of Patty Mills' career or this season tells the whole story of what can be believed in terms of, who he actually is as a player, because it's simply not true. I'll tell you about what some of what happened is and why this actually has played a bigger part in Nets minds and Nets fans' minds than it probably does. First, I'm going to talk to you about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net's your number one source for all betting needs and sports info. It's got the developments you need. It's got this weekend's Masters. Tiger just teed off over there at the Masters. Maybe you bet him to make the cut or miss the cut. That is just some of the stuff BetOnline has over for you. They have podcasts, they have reviews, they have every league, basically every sport up there as well. It's your number one spot for all of your betting needs. BetOnline is a continued source for all the sports wagering information you could hope to ever find, live betting, esports, scores, and more. Head on over to betonline.net right now. You can use your mobile device. You get all the trends and action. Go over to BetOnline where the game starts. Okay, another thing about Patty Mills here and why the story becomes larger than it becomes larger than what the actual numbers are. So I'll go through a couple numbers here. One that's going to tell the story about why in your mind it's a bigger thing than it is, and one that's going to make you, I think, hopefully just feel better about what we have here in Patty Mills. So the first is, if you look at the trend line and the moving average for Patty Mills's 3-point season, and I wish I had put it up on the screen here, but I basically ran the numbers today, did the moving average along the entire course of the season. What you can see is it basically looks like a ski slope that ends up going down toward the chairlift and just kind of flattening out. Because he starts off, like I said, at the beginning of the season, shooting essentially 100% from 3. Obviously, it's going to decline. It sits around the 50% range for the first month. And then if you look at the actual graph, it's basically just evened out into this 40% range. The moving average has been essentially, over the last 3 months, what Patty Mills is as a 3-point shooter, which is a 40% 3-point shooter this year. Up again, by the way, best of his career over the last 6 years. He shot 41% in 2016-17 with the Spurs. Ever since then, 37%, 39%, 38%, 38%, and 40% this season. Okay? 40% 3-point shooter. That's essentially when the Nets signed up for Patty Mills this season as a 6-man. They were hoping, probably, for a 40% 3-point shooter. Looks are going to be a little better. You got Kevin Durant, you have Kyrie Irving. At the time, you have James Harden, who can turn, even some mediocre 3-point shooters into excellent ones because of how good their looks are going to be. So you want to say, hey, we're going to get a little uptick on his production, on his efficiency. I think that's a fair assumption to make, and Patty Mills has given you that. 100% throughout the whole season. Not 100% 3-point shooting, but 100% he's given you what you wanted, from his performance. And I told you that trend line, if you look at it over the last couple months, just basically sits in that 40% range the whole time, because that's what he is. And over large sample sizes, players, especially basketball players, and especially around this particular stat, tend to just be what they are over the long term, over a large sample size, which is how you have to take things. And if you don't take things that way, folks, I don't, again, maybe we're on the wrong podcast here, but basketball is in some ways utterly predictable. On a game-to-game, it's fun because there can be some variance. You can shoot poorly. You can shoot out the lights out. Things can work out in your favor. But over the course of a season, you are usually going to be who you are. Even over the course of a 7-game series, it tends to start to even out a little bit. You still get some kind of wild swings, but in the end, the better teams tend to win. The better shooting teams tend to win. And that's, how we mostly get the best champion each year out of the NBA, as opposed to something like the NCAA where it's just one game And if you run bad from three or from the field for one game, you're out, and you're a 1 seed that's all of a sudden going home real early, or you get an 8 seed that ends up winning the championship. Like, that's just sort of the way things end up working. But in the NBA, when you get the larger sample sizes, and then you get 7-game series, things like that, you're going to tend to figure out where the numbers are, and they're going to usually land where you have been for your entire career. But the thing with the Nets, folks, is, one, was there sort of a slump in this time following the All-Star break? Yeah, there was. There has been. I'm not going to deny that. There was definitely a slump. It was not directly in the entire month following the All-Star break, but there have been a slightly downward shooting trend during that time, simply because he was always probably going to have this. He was always going to regress to not being a 50% or even high 40% three-point shooter. But where it really triggers in the Nets fans' minds, I think, is that when Patty misses, the Nets tend to lose. And when Patty Mills makes shots, the Nets tend to win. Well, that's going to be the case for just about any player, by the way. Like, that's just not a Patty Mills thing. If Kevin Durant hits a lot more of his shots in a game, or Kyrie Irving hits a lot more of his shots in a game, the team's going to tend to win. And if a player that takes a lot of big shots for you in a game makes a lot, you're going to have a better chance to win. And if they miss a lot, they're going to have a worse chance to win. That's just obvious, I guess, but maybe it's not that obvious. But it becomes a part of the narrative when lately you go through some of this extended shooting slump for a bit, and it coincides with Nets losses, because the numbers there are pretty accurate. Over on StatMuse, you can look this up pretty easily. In games where Patty Mills has shot better than 40% from, reverse. In games where the Nets have won this season, Patty Mills is a 42% three-point shooter. In games where they've lost, he's a 35% three-point shooter. Okay? So in the losses, those misses become amplified. Whereas we probably don't actually give him enough credit for the makes. Or maybe he got them early on and then maybe stopped getting them as the season wore on. Because he's going to take those lumps, like when he goes 0 for 7 against Atlanta, 0 for 5 from 3, and they lose by 7, you tend to really notice it. Okay? He plays only 12 minutes against Charlotte, goes 0 for 3. You kind of notice it. You don't notice the 2 for 11 against Miami, where they ended up winning because, hey, they won the game. So what are we going to have to really talk about? 0 for 3 against Memphis in 25 minutes, loss. 0 for 4 against Portland, you don't really notice it. They won. You see where I'm getting at here, though. Some of these misses are going to look a lot worse when they're also dovetailing with actually losing the game. And that's just because that's what happens in our minds, right? This is how we put the story together, like I told you at the beginning. We want to tell stories in our minds that that can help make variable outcomes make a lot of sense. It makes it easier. It makes us sane, probably, to some degree. Otherwise, we'd be looking at all these sort of random occurrences and wanting to make sense of them, and when they don't, it becomes very difficult for our brain to sort of figure out that story. Look, humans are story-based people. Our stories are kind of what tell the entire tale of human history, is these stories that have been passed down. Stories are what make up societies, and stories are the things that you put together in your mind to make sense of it. And so we want to make sense of this world where Patty Mills, there must have been something that happened, right? Okay, what happened that made him shoot worse, so that when I noticed that he missed shots with the Nets lost games? Because again, I told you, he shoots worse in Nets losses and shoots better in Nets wins. Those two, they're connected, right? And so we have to find a point. We have to find that point along the timeline that will tell us everything we need to know about it. And of course, it's going to be the three-point contest, but I'm telling you right now, folks, it's not. It's just not it. There's no statistical evidence really to back it up. Because like I said, he went through a long stretch where it was just totally fine. Streakiness is not predictable. Streakiness is not something we can look at and say, they're on a streak, so it's going to continue. Or they're not on this negative streak, so it's going to continue. If streaks were so predictable, why do they end? You've probably heard us say that multiple times over the podcast. And the reason I bring it up is, too, because we got this Knicks game on Wednesday where he goes 5 for 7, absolutely critical shots. They win the game. And to some degree, it's on the back of him hitting some momentum swinging threes that the Nets desperately needed in the moment. That 5 for 7, by the way, went to take his, he was 2 for 15 in the previous 2 games. And all of a sudden he's 7 for 20, right? You can see all of a sudden the big shift in 1 game's worth of difference in the overall 3-point percentage in just, 1 game's worth of makes. This is all regression, folks. This is what happens. Patty Mills If you give him enough shots, he's going to be about a 38 to 39 to 40% three-point shooter. It's not going to get broken because of something that happened at some All-Star game. It's not going to get broken because of, a couple racks of balls that he made or missed during a very small sample size. There's no evidence to back that up. There's nothing to worry about with Patty Mills. You want to worry about other parts of his game? Hey, is he going to get hunted in the playoffs on defense? Sure. Okay, that's just going to happen. He's going to play huge leverage minutes. We'll see. But the part where Patty Mills has a broken three-point shot is just simply not true. Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about where the Thursday night's games landed the Nets in terms of the playoff seeding, what to really hone in for over the weekend, which is going to be about as big a weekend as basketball, or for basketball, as the Nets fans could hope, because it's going to tell the whole story of where they land heading into the play-in game. First, I'm going to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. Like we said before, it's that time of year. Maybe this time of year is where the New Year's resolutions start to tail off. Maybe you went through that Patty Mills like decline a little bit when it came to your dieting or came to eating healthy. Maybe it was just regression. Maybe that's what you were always going to do, like what happened with Patty Mills. Well, look, hey, I'm here to tell you, get that regression line up with your health by going over to Built Bar. All Built Bars are covered 100% real chocolate, and they have the low-calorie, high-protein sort of mix that you want with this kind of snack. You replace your candy bars with these things. Don't go through the candy bar aisle and grab one of those for a snack. Get the Built Bar. Fill your pockets and your bags with these. Make sure these are what you're grabbing for when you get hungry. You go to Built.com. You can just go through the macros charts. You'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb, 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. You compare it to the candy bar. Candy bar can't even match up against it, so don't even bother. And all the flavors too. Coconut almond, mint brownie, white chocolate cookies and cream. It's all there. Tons of flavors. Really everything you could ever imagine. It's too many to read off just on this little spot. Go to Built.com to figure it all out. You also go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Okay, before we actually get to the playoff scenario, something came in and around while we were recording this episode. Kind of surprising news that the Nets were going to release James Johnson. And it comes on the heels of a couple podcasts, not in a row, but a couple of the last ones that we've talked about, where Adam and I, and also Chris Mulholland and I, speculated on the chances that the Nets would possibly convert Kessler Edwards' contract to a standard contract off of the two-way, and it was always going to mean that they released one of the players. And we kind of didn't think they would do that around some of the veteran guys. And we talked about Aldridge, and we talked about Blake Griffin. We did not actually mention James Johnson in that for a couple of reasons. One, James Johnson had actually been playing more minutes than either of those two guys. He had played 31 minutes against Atlanta. He had played 11 and 14-12 the previous 3 games. He was out for the last two games for the Nets. And I don't know if it was an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, or I just didn't think it would actually happen with James Johnson, because it seemed like there was times where Nash did want his defense out there on the court for all the offensive warts. But the Nets go ahead and make the move to release James Johnson to waivers and to convert Kessler Edwards' contract. James Johnson is not eligible to be picked up by another team to make a playoff run. So, not that necessarily would have happened, but the timing of this means that it's not possible for it to happen for James Johnson. But it does mean the Nets do see Kessler Edwards as a piece for this season. So I did find it interesting. Like I said, with James Johnson, that did surprise me when it was first reported. Shams Charania was one of the first people to put it out there that the Nets had decided to move on from him. Like I said, I thought there was pieces of his game that they would want defensively, maybe in the playoffs, for all of his warts, his size and relative athleticism on the defensive end. But more about just kind of his size is something the Nets haven't really had. We've seen him play okay-ish minutes against like Giannis in the past. And it was more about thinking, Aldridge had seemed kind of buried. Blake was not really in the mix to any meaningful extent. And we kind of had used those guys as the possible examples of what the Nets could do if they decided to wanting to move Kessler Edwards into a full-time sort of contract role to have him be available for the playoffs. And those just seem like logically just in terms of guys who had just played way less, right? Like Blake has just played significantly less than James Johnson. LaMarcus Aldridge, between the injury and then just coming back from the injury and not really playing, had played much less than James Johnson when James Johnson has been healthy and available. So a somewhat surprising move. I can't say that I hate it. I wonder if so a couple of things. One, we were wrong because we made the prediction, or I'll just say I was wrong. I was wrong making the prediction that they would not choose to go this route with Kessler because of the how some of the veterans had viewed the Brooklyn as being a landing spot. I will say that the moving off of James Johnson seems like still half correct along that line of thinking, because it's still a little confusing to me that a guy that was playing more and I think actually has a little bit more of a role than guys like Aldridge and Blake moving forward for this playoff push, that they would choose to move off his contract. So I do wonder if part of this still plays into like the name brand aspect of some of those veterans, like Blake, like LMA, these guys who just have, more of a career track record. The resume for over the career is better. Their name kind of stands at a higher, elevation among the league in terms of just like their historical performance than James Johnson. I kind of do wonder if that still plays into it, because from a basketball point of view, James Johnson had just been playing more than those guys. So not curious in that, like, it's not really so surprising that that it happened. I guess just when we had thought about the situation, James Johnson's name had not come up because he was actually playing. So just to clarify, because I had some people already ring out to me and say, you were wrong about this call. Yeah, I kind of get it. We were wrong in terms of, them not converting Kessler Edwards' contract. But I don't think anyone really saw the James Johnson being fully cut. I'd never seen it even speculated among anybody that even covers the team. So, like I said, somewhat surprising move. It's not a massive loss. James Johnson, look, he was what he was for the Nets. He was a frustrating player at times. He got out over his skis a few times on offense. In terms of just like the ball handling too much, probably was asked at times to do too much on offense and was, overly willing to do stuff on offense. I still do think there were things that he did okay. I think there's situations where like a few more, like him plus all offensive guys maybe wouldn't be with KD at the 5 wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It's not going to matter in the end because he's not on the team anymore. Obviously, was a total foul machine, was among the league leaders in fouls per minute this season. Narrowly, he was able to just get over Andre Drummond on the season. These are among guys that have played more than 1,000 minutes this season. James Johnson was in the top 10. I think he's eighth overall in fouls per minute. We saw this happen multiple times. The guy just was an aggressive defender and fouled a lot. Sometimes the fouls were silly, like the take foul against Drew Holiday in that Bucks game, which was a total and utter head scratcher. And there was just a lot of reasons that the Nets fans and Nets folks would get frustrated with James Johnson's game. It could look out of control at times. Like I said, it was aggressive. It felt like it was sometimes mistake prone. And I think there was just times where he was asked to do a lot in a role that maybe he wasn't totally suited for. So, interesting move by the Nets here. Obviously, they see Kessler Edwards. We always knew he was part of the future, but they see him more as part of the immediate future than maybe we thought was going to be the case. And yeah, so he's going to get maybe some quality minutes going into the playoffs this time around, and the play-in as well. As a wing defender, they're probably going to need him. They're going to need him to knock down some threes. We obviously know James Johnson, that really wasn't in his bag, the outside shooting at all. The Nets do need guys that can stretch the court at least a little bit. One thing that is funny, if you look at the offseason signings that the Nets brought in, kind of no one else is around anymore. They brought in Patty Mills, who we just talked about. He's still on the team. Brought in Bembry, he's gone. Brought in Javon Carter, gone. Brought in Paul Millsap, gone. Brought in James Johnson, gone. I don't know what that says about the moves. Some of these were speculative veteran minimum kind of moves for the team that, you're hoping to maybe catch lightning in the bottle with one of them. Not Patty Mills. Patty Mills was like a real contract. The other guys. You're hoping to maybe catch some lightning in a bottle. At times it seemed like we'd gotten a little something. I thought there was quality minutes out of Bembry early. The Millsap thing, look, I defended him early on. It became harder and harder to defend. And that probably is just basically over for Millsap. The James Johnson thing we just talked about. Javon Carter had to be moved after the trade deadline when they brought in more pieces. So that kind of made sense based on what, the playing time he was getting. But, the offseason moves for the Nets, like I said, Patty Mills is the last guy standing here pretty much among the group that they brought in, all of whom that we were pretty excited about, I think, at the time for what they could possibly represent on this team. And we just really never got chances to see a lot of these groups together, like, Kyrie obviously early on. I think all of these guys look slightly different if it's a James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant led offense. I think each one of those moves probably actually looks a little better. They just never got around to getting that grouping together. Because I think for the sort of the size and not needing to have the ball a ton that these guys were sort of brought in to be these role players, each of them in turn was asked to do a little too much, I think, at times, and it really wasn't part of the core vision of what Marks and company thought they were doing when they first signed these guys. So you want to say it's sort of an L along the offseason signing department. It sure looks like that based on who is left here on the team, which is only Patty Mills. And I also think there's context to it that points in the direction of, it was just supposed to look different overall, and the teams had to go through a massive upheaval now because of just sort of circumstance and all this other stuff that's happened. So no more James Johnson. Kessler Edwards converted into a two-way contract. Not really much changes in the standings in the Eastern Conference. The Charlotte Hornets were able to take care of an undermanned Magic team who's still trying to tank. So they stay still a game back of the Nets overall in the loss column. Obviously, they own the tiebreaker over Brooklyn if they were to finish with the same record based on that last game that the Nets lost to them. So, but because Charlotte lost the other night, the Nets do stay a game ahead. So not much changes. We're going to, this weekend we'll tell the rest of the story. And now we have Kessler Edwards as a Net full-time, and that's probably going to move into next season as well. And it's a nice story for the guy who we thought had some upside or coming out of Summer League, coming out of the draft, thought there was probably a nice little floor on what his skill set would be, and he's done everything you could ask for over the course of this season. Okay, we'll be back possibly over the weekend. Let's see how this Net stuff shakes out here over the weekend. Adam and I could be coming at you either on just sometime over the weekend if something kind of weird or crazy happens. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. I'll put that link in the show notes. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts as well. Get us in that car ride if you're in the commute. Make sure you just sign up for the podcast there as well. We will be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.